We're holding Samach Chesam Beis. Let's see, it's got 8 lines from the bottom. Reb Sheshes called Klas and Yom and Mahadalei Talmudei. Every 30 days he would chazer all his learning. He would do chazarim. He would review. The Tali V'koi B'ibra D'Dasha. He would stand by a threshold. V'amar, and he says, Chadoi nafshai, l'cha kroi, l'cha tenai. My soul rejoices, For you I read, for you I review the Mishnah. There's a lot going on here. Okay. Aini, is that really so? He's learning for himself. However, it says, "V'amar Rabbi Lazar al Mali Terlin is kamish mayim ba'aretz nemam lebisiyam b'layla chukas shemayim ba'aretz lesamti im lebrisi yomam b'layla." If not for studying my Torah day and night, then the heavens and the earth I wouldn't have placed. I wouldn't have created. So, in other words, the Torah, learning of Torah is not just for his soul to rejoice. This learning of Torah is for the whole world to be kept. So the Gemara answers, "Mikara ki'abadai to the nafshei kavod." At the beginning, he learned for himself. He started off; he was learning for himself. Okay, what was going on here and how we got into this was we started saying there's a machlekes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua if eating on Yom Tov is an obligation or if it's voluntary. Rabbi Yeshua said it's an obligation; it's a mitzvah, it's a commandment, and Rabbi Eliezer says that it's voluntary. However, everyone agreed that Shavuos eating was a commandment, was an obligation. And then we started to discuss the greatness of Shavuos. So we quoted Rabbi Yosef, where Rabbi Yosef says that he would have this special feast, and he says if not for this day, there would be many people in the like Yosef. There would be many people. There's many Yosefs in the marketplace. So in other words, it's because of this day that he became special. And then Reb Sheshes says he would review this. How does this come in over here? It could be that both Reb Yosef and Reb Sheshes were known for their memories. They're actually both blind, and they both were known for their memories because they each had memorized the whole Torah. So that's called Sinai actually. In the Gemara, there was 2 types of sages. One was called the Iker Harim. He could uproot mountains. The other one was called Sinai. So both Reb Yosef and Reb Sheshes would go under that category. I saw basically with my brother-in-law Naftali Sitchin, learned this Kabbalistic book. Google him, Sefer Google him. Anyway, in there it said, why does Reb Sheshes say Chadoi nafshai? My soul rejoices. So this Sefer Google was discussing when a person is a second Gilgal, for whom is all the merits going to? For the first Gilgal or for the second Gilgal? It's an interesting discussion. Anyway, it's not so clear. Every time it's different. But what they were saying is that Reb Sheshes was a Gilgal of Baba Ben Buta. Baba Ben Buta was the sage many years earlier that gave Herod the advice to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. But Sheshes, Shin Tav, is in Atbash is Beis Aleph, Baba Ben Buta. So, for whatever the case was, his learning of Torah was going back only to Baba Ben Buta. He says, "Chadai nafshai," my soul rejoices, going back to that. If I remember correctly. Then he says, why was he standing by the door? Because Baba is a door. Baba has a translation. Baba Kama is the gate. It's a gate. Baba is a gate. Anyway. Okay. What do we know? Amar Ravashi. Ravashi says, "L'may the kamar of Elazar and Nami Yamtiv Rishus Yislei Percha." Okay, the conversation between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua went like this. Rabbi Eliezer, who's Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus, he holds that all preparations for mitzvahs could be performed on Shabbos. And Rabbi Shua said they can't. When it came to bringing a carbon Pesach, Rabbi Eliezer says, you could bring it from out of the Tchum. And Rabbi Shua said, no, you can't. You can't bring it from out of the Tchum. It should have been brought before. So now starts this discussion. Rabbi Eliezer says, 1 second, I can do the shechita. You can't bring it from out of the Tchum. It's or you can't cut up the wart. It's a derabanan. I can do a deraisa. I can't do a derabanan. So Rabbi Shua says, no, you can't do a derabanan. I'll prove it to you. Because on Yom Tov, you're allowed to shech, which is a deraisa, which would be a deraisa, but you're allowed to. And you're not allowed to do other derabanans that you could have done beforehand. So you could have brought from out of the tchum. You could have brought from you could have cut the wart off before Pesach. You're not allowed to do that on Shabbos if Shabbos is if Erev Pesach is Shabbos. So just because you're allowed to do a deraisa doesn't mean you're allowed to do a derabanan. It has to do with should it have done beforehand? Should it have been done beforehand? That's Rabbi Shua's claim back to Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer's response was, he said, what are you comparing Yom Tov? There's no mitzvah to eat on Yom Tov. All of that is voluntary. And you can't compare that to what we're discussing here. You're trying to bring a carbon Pesach. There's a mitzvah to bring the carbon Pesach. Rabbi Shua, the reason why he brought this up was because he holds that there is a mitzvah to eat on Yom Tov. That's how we got into it. There is a mitzvah to eat on Yom Tov. And nevertheless, you're not allowed to do things that could have been done beforehand, even if they're only rabbinic. Now the Gemara says, the response that Rabbi Eliezer gave to him has a question on it. Rabbi Eliezer says it's only rishus. It says there's a question on that. Yislei percha. Uma Yom Tov shita by malacha shel rishus. Okay, let's discuss the level of rishus. Rishus means voluntary. Let's discuss on that level. When it comes to rishus, on Yom Tov, you're allowed to do a malacha. You're allowed to chef, and it's only shvus, right? It's only voluntary to eat on Yom Tov, according to Rabbi Eliezer, and nevertheless you're allowed to do that. However, you're not allowed to do other malachas that could have been done beforehand. So Shabbos, now let's take it over to Shabbos. We're doing this comparison. Shabbos shleihitah malacha ela malacha shel mitzvah. So on Shabbos, where there's also a permissibility, it needs to be a mitzvah, it can't be voluntary. It needs to be a real mitzvah, like, for example, the carbon Pesach, the shechita. Is it not all the more so that you shouldn't be allowed to permit things that could have been done beforehand, even if they're only rabbinic? So in other words, even with Rabbi Eliezer's response that how can you compare something that's voluntary, shechting on Yom Tov, to shechting the carbon Pesach, that's a mitzvah. This is only voluntary. Even with that comparison, you still have the same logic that if on Yom Tov, when I'm allowed to shech, I'm not allowed to do the shvus together with it. So could take that over to Shabbos. On Shabbos, when I'm allowed to shech for a different reason, for the mitzvah, I shouldn't be allowed to do the shvus that's with it. So Rabbi Eliezer shvus the mitzvah adiflei. Rabbi Eliezer says that his response to this is that when there's a mitzvah there, it's a totally different story. Even though the breaking of Shabbos is only allowed when there's a mitzvah, as opposed to the breaking of Yom Tov, which is allowed even for voluntary, even for just for shechita, just to eat, you're allowed to. But when a mitzvah factor is inserted here, then it allows even for other things as well. That's Rabbi Eliezer response.
But can't you get away with the concept that Eve does Hashem b'simcha? It's always a mitzvah to be b'simcha, so that kind of becomes the loophole door for.
Yeah. It doesn't seem to be the the halacha uses a certain logic that's when it comes to those things. Yeah. When it comes to those
or
things,
simchas mitzvah in itself. I mean, it's not just Eve does Hashem b'simcha. It's the simcha of the mitzvah. And he had said it yesterday. Who was
right? Rashi says, "Bin namelchem sheyismach by Michael." Right. Yeah. So maybe the pshat is that Rebbe Lezer doesn't hold to that. He doesn't hold that of Simchas Yom Tov. He holds that lachem is optional. Yeah. I know sometimes this gets stretched, like over the parameters of where the halachic logic works. You say, well, the whole Torah was to make peace in the world, and so therefore, I need to be happy. Okay. Tanya, let's start in the Brisa. I'm a Rebbe Lezer. Rebbe Lezer says we have a little bit more discussion of the conversation in the Brises. Mali imdach machshiri mitzvah shel achri shchitas Shabbos disabed le mitzvah. If after the mitzvah is performed, which means, let's say, I shechted the korban, I'm allowed to do other things that come along with the korban after the shechita. For example, Rashi's example is michi krovov. You're allowed to clean out the intestines, so it shouldn't smell. Taisvis has another example. Taisvis' example is hekder chalavim of a korban pesach. You're allowed to burn the fat even on Shabbos. Now you see what's happening here. You did a shechita on Shabbos. The sacrifice is 100% valid. You're allowed to go on by extension and do other rabbinic prohibitions. He says if that's the case, all the more so before the mitzvah is performed. For sure, I should be able to do whatever is preparations to be able to allow me to do the mitzvah. Over here, the mitzvah was performed and I can continue. And over here, I wasn't able to do the mitzvah yet because it still has a wart. It's out of the tchum. But I should be allowed to do these things to get the mitzvah done. It's a good logic. Amalei Rabbi Akiva responds, the Mali, he says, why are you surprised? Akiva's response is, Shabbos was already like pushed aside. So once the door was open, so we finish off the activities. Over there, you didn't get the mitzvah in the door yet. Shabbos wasn't pushed off yet, so we don't push it off just to do those preparations. There's another response. Over here, the korban was good, so therefore I allow you to finish off with other things. Okay, Shabbos was pushed off. But let's say we allow you to cut off the wart on the animal to make the sacrifice eligible. We allow you to bring the animal in from outside the tchum. And then you do the shechita, and it comes out the shechita's puzzle. So something wrong. So everything that you did before was a chil Shabbos. That's the second response. The Gemara doesn't like this response. The Gemara says, if that's the case, then how are you allowed to do any shechita on a korban? Maybe the shechita is going to be puzzle, and it's going to come out that the shechita wasn't good, and the korban wasn't good. It was a chil Shabbos for nothing. that's not a good. This concept of maybe you would have, it's not gonna work out, and it would be a Chil Shabbos. That's not a good response. Ella ha'amar le beresha uparche ha'amar le hach the mali imdachu. So what the Gemara suggests of how to arrange this brisa is like this: that originally Rabbi Akiva responded to Rabbi Eliezer that before the shechita we don't allow you to do anything because the shechita may become puzzle, and then everything is going to what you did before was Chil Shabbos. Rabbi Eliezer responds to him and says that's not a good raya, that's not a good logic, because then you can never do shechita. Maybe the shechita is going to be puzzled. So then Rabbi Akiva responds back to him, and he says, well, there's a difference between once Shabbos is postponed, is pushed off, and we allowed you to do the shechita, then you're allowed to finish the sacrifice, versus before anything happened, we don't allow you to do anything. So we arranged it in an order so that what gets rejected should have gone first, and then Rabbi Akiva's response, the acceptable response, is after. Peshiv Rabbi Akiva v'amar hazot techia. This is an interesting little piece over here. Rabbi Akiva says to Rabbi Eliezer, the argument was between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua. And Rabbi Akiva starts off, he interjects. He goes into this conversation and he says, look, sprinkling of the paraduma for someone that's tummy mace, you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos, even though that will allow him to be able to eat the korban Pesach. Now, that's actually a mitzvah to sprinkle on it. That's a mitzvah. And, well, it's a mitzvah because it will allow him to eat the korban Pesach. And nevertheless, you're not allowed to do that. So those other things, cutting off the yabelas that could have been done the day before, that should not push off Shabbos. Rabbi Eliezer says, I actually hold that sprinkling of the paraduma does push off Shabbos, so you're allowed to do it. That was the conversation. Tanya, starting a brisa. Amalei Rabbi Eliezer Akiva b'shchita hishavtani b'shchita temisase. Gives him this very harsh comment. He says, "You're arguing with me about shchita. His death should be with shchita, like a curse." I don't know where I saw this. Someone says that for 12 years, Rabbi Akiva sat by Rabbi Eliezer and he never asked a single question. He was just listening. All of a sudden, Rabbi Eliezer thought maybe he understands, he doesn't understand, he didn't know where he's holding. He didn't have any feedback. This is the first question. Maybe the Yerushalmi says this. I saw this somewhere this morning. This is the first question that he gets. Rabbi Eliezer is shocked. So I asked him this question. So Rabbi Eliezer says he doesn't know if he respects him, if he doesn't respect him, because he was a student that never gave him any feedback. So he says, you're starting up with shchita. Shchita should be his end. Anyway, one of the goyim says that's not what happened, because when Rabbi Akiva died, his skin was raked with combs, and he died with it was considered shchita. Anyway, he had not a natural death. Amalai, Rabbi Akiva responds to him, Rebbe, Al tachbareni b'shas hadin. Don't deny what you taught me. At the time of judgment means at the time of when we're discussing a topic. Kach mekablani mimcha. This is actually what I heard from you. Hazosh will see ve'ena deichas Shabbos. You told this to me. You told me that you're not allowed to sprinkle the water of the paraduma on that water on Shabbos. It's Masak and Gavra. That's what we learned before in Rashi. Here we're going to learn something else. So 1 second. So now we have a question. So why did Rebbe Lezer deny this? If he's the one that said it originally. Amar Ula, Rebbe Lezer ki agmrei azah the truma agmrei, the truma gufei leidachi Shabbos. Aha. Ula says Rabbi Akiva was using the wrong hazah. What Rabbi Eliezer had said, according to Ula, is that you're not allowed to sprinkle the water of the para aduma on a kohen that wants to eat truma, and it's Shabbos. So you're not allowed to separate truma on Shabbos, and so truma itself doesn't push off Shabbos. So therefore, you can't sprinkle the water of the para aduma on him to allow him to eat truma. Now, that was what Rebbe Lezer taught Rabbi Akiva. But Rabbi Akiva is saying Hazah doesn't push off Shabbos, and he's using it to talk about the Korban Pesach. That's a different story. Rabbi Akiva nami ki yosvei Hazah the Truma yosvei, shehi mitzvah, b'misham shvus, v'hu savar Hazah the Pesach k'maisavlei. Rabbi Akiva was using this response correctly. He was saying that you see Hazah, which is a mitzvah, doesn't push off Shabbos. Which Hazah? Truma doesn't push off Shabbos, which is exactly what Rabbi Lezer taught him. Rabbi Eliezer thinks he's talking about Hazah, the sprinkling of the water in order to allow him to eat the Korban Pesach. And he says, no, I hold you allowed to sprinkle to eat the Korban Pesach. They're saying the same words, but it's a totally different story. Okay. Massive Rabba. Rabba has a question on this, on Ula's Pshat. Heshiv Rabbi Akiva v'Amar, he quotes a brisa. Again, the brisas are more descriptive, and they give us more details than what we got in the Mishnah, and different brisas give us different details. Rabba has this brisa. He says that Rabbi Akiva responds, v'Amar, Hazas tamei meis techiyah. There's a problem over here. He spells it out. Rabbi Akiva's response was not Hazah. Was Hazah tamei meis techiyah. Schal shvi shalai lias b'Shabbos v'erev Pesach shi mitzvah. B'misham shus v'nedeichas Shabbos. We're dealing with Erev Pesach, and it doesn't push off Shabbos. Aha. Elavadai Hazah the Pesach Agmei. It must be that Rabbi Eliezer, if this is the case, that Rabbi Akiva is saying that he learned it directly from Rabbi Eliezer, then it must have been that Rabbi Eliezer actually told him Hazad of Erev Pesach doesn't push up Shabbos. If Rabbi Eliezer taught it to him, then why is Rabbi Eliezer asking on him or arguing with him? Why did Rabbi Eliezer say that? I actually hold the opposite. Rabbi Lezer gamre yisakir levasa Rabbi Akiva ladkuri gamre. Rabbi Lezer had forgotten his teachings, and Rabbi Akiva reminds him. I had never saw this before. I mean, this is in this Gemara clearly, so that's what happened. But we see this a lot by Abaya and Rabbi Yosef. So we see that Rabbi Yosef forgot his teachings, and Rabbi was always reminding him. It's very common that Abaya is reminding him. But that Rabbi Akiva should remind what Rabbi Lezer forgot, especially when the Gemara says, I don't know if it's a Gemara. Yeah, it's a Gemara. It's the Mishnah. Borsid Sheinam Abatipa. He didn't forget anything. It's a little surprising, huh? Why didn't Rabbi Akiva just tell him directly? You taught us when he first started the conversation. He thought that wouldn't be derech eretz. So he didn't say that you taught it to me. First, he had to wait for Rabbi Eliezer to respond to him, and then he says back, no, but you this is what you taught me. Now the Gemara says, Vazam my time Shabbos. Why is that so? Why does the sprinkling of the water of the para aduma on a person that's tamei to allow him to be able to eat the Korban Pesach that evening? Why is it not pushing off the Shabbos? It's like shechting the korban Pesach, which you do on Shabbos. Michti. Tiltuli ba'almahu. Tidchi Shabbos mishum Pesach. It's just muktzah. The water is just muktzah. Amar Rabba, Zir Shemi Yitlena b'Yavren Arba B'Shus Rabin. We've had this before in other places, but not about the water of the paraduma. This is unique. Rather about shofar. Why don't you blow shofar on Shabbos? Why don't you shake the lulav on Shabbos? Why don't you read the Megillah on Shabbos? Maybe you're going to carry it 4 amos in Rosh Hashanah. You'll take it to a bucky or someone's going to. Here, why can't you sprinkle the water of the paraduma? You might carry it 4 amos. A little surprising. Who was allowed to touch the water of the paraduma? Probably only the people that were very, very select, pure and everything. That's a little surprising. Yeah, we have to match this up with the Gemara Sukkah that talks about the arava, the mitzvah arava that was put on the side of the Mizbeah. The Gemara discusses, has a comparison there between taking the lulav on Shabbos or taking the arava on Shabbos. Peshan arava, you put this big arava on the side of the Mizbeah. It says over there the Bezdin would do it. It wasn't every individual. So over here, we have to match this up and see how it's going to fit. Every person is walking around with a little vial of paraduma water. It sounds funny. In Amaretz, it doesn't say in Amaretz it's going to go to a rabbi. Okay. Rabbi Eliezer, Niavre, Damar Rabbi Eliezer, Machshir Mitzvah Deichnas Shabbos. This is a huge issue. Rabbi Eliezer holds that Machshirei Mitzvah push off Shabbos. All the preparatory activities you're allowed to do on Shabbos. And now we're saying that he actually held that you're not allowed to sprinkle the water of the paraduma on Shabbos. Why not? He says, because you may carry. So what? So what? You're allowed to do everything. It's a machshir mitzvah. Yeah, mamish doesn't fit. Amri hani mile hechad the gavra gufei chazi v'rami chayuvela. Aval hachad the gavra gufei lechazi v'rami chayuvela. Very interesting teretz. When did we say that you're allowed to do preparatory activities to fulfill a mitzvah? That's when the person was obligated to perform the mitzvah. But over here, because the person is tamei, so there's no obligation on him to do the mitzvah. What are you going to do? You want him to become tar, to become obligated to do the mitzvah. That we don't do. There was no obligation. You're creating the obligation. Amar Rabba. Rabba says, Rabbi Eliezer, Katan Bari, Mechaman Lechaman Avreisel Mol B'Shabbos Chazilei, Katan Chayla, Ein Mechaman Lechaman Avreisel Mol Dele Chazilei. Rabba says something happens over here, which is a little bit, it sounds like ridiculous. Let's say you have someone that needs a bris. So you're allowed to do the bris on Shabbos. What about heating water? Well, before the bris, saying like this, if the person is well, so he's obligated to have the bris because he's well, he's going to perform the bris. You're allowed to heat water for him to prepare him for the bris. And someone that's not well, that needs the warm bath to be able to have the bris, you're not allowed to warm the water for him because he's not obligated, because he's not well. Now, the water would make him well, but you're not allowed to do it because he's not obligated. You're not allowed to create the chiyuv, according to what we just said. Amar Rava says back, he says to Rava, oh, this is interesting. Very rare that you have Rava talking to Rava. Yeah, you have a bias speaking to Rava a lot. We know that Rava and Rava argue. Rava is a student of Rava. But to have a conversation, you see, it doesn't actually say Amar Lei. We're still not, it's very seldom that you have an Amar Lei. Okay, Amar Rava, from the way the Gemara is put, it could be that Rava didn't actually say it to Rava. Yeah, the book told us Tanan Bamiraim from Aaron Hyman. He thinks that Rava left. There's something, and he didn't learn with Rava. There's no conversations. I don't know if he's correct. We found once that there was a conversation, Rava and Rava, but over here it doesn't have to be. Amar Rava bi'ibarihu lama lecham lav. What are you saying? You're saying the healthy one you're going to heat the water for. The unhealthy one you're not going to heat the water for to prepare him for the bris. Rava says if he's healthy, why does he need water? He doesn't need the water. You can't heat the water for him either. Doesn't need it. Elama Rava hakol chaylen hein etzel mila. Rava says the way it works by a bris is that everyone is considered ill for the bris. Echad katan bari v'echad katan chayil. Whether he is healthy or he is ill, everyone is ill in front of a bris for a surgery. And ein mechaman leichaman lavreisei ulamala b'shabbos daha leichazi. You're not allowed to heat any water before the bris. Which means that if the person doesn't need the water, then fine, you can do the bris. I don't know why he has to add in hakol chaylen. I guess what it means is that the water needed to be heated from before Shabbos, even according to Rebbe Lezer. That's what it means. Everyone needs hot water before the bris. That's what he's saying. The only thing is you're not allowed to heat it on Shabbos for anyone. Okay. Eisvei Abaya. Abaya has a question on the way that we're learning. He says, what we've established is that if a person isn't obligated and you're creating an obligation, so then that doesn't push off Shabbos. If a person has an exemption, we don't push off Shabbos to allow him to do the Karban Pesach because he's exempt, and just leave it at that. Don't create a new obligation. Where do we see that? The person that's tummy. Eisvei Abaya. Oral Shleimal Anish Karis de Rebbe Lezer. Very strong question. Abaya says an oral, someone that wasn't circumcised, and he's able to get a bris on Erev Pesach. He's Anish Karis. He has Karis not because of the bris. He has Karis because he didn't bring the Karban Pesach. That means he was obligated to bring the Karban Pesach, and he didn't. In other words, even though Gavra Leichazi, even though he wasn't allowed to bring the Karban Pesach, but the fact that he could have corrected and then made himself allowed means that he still has Karis. That means that the obligation is there. Just because he's exempt right now, but he could get that off, that doesn't mean that there was no obligation. Yeah, Abai is looking at it. He's looking at it totally differently. If a person is exempt, but he can get that exemption off, he was still obligated to get it off. So, back to our problem before, according to Rebbe Lezer, you should be allowed to sprinkle the water of the paraduma on this person to become tar, to bring the Karban Pesach. As you see, he has a chiyuv karis when he didn't have a bris. Obviously, there's a chiyuv there. There was an obligation. You see clearly that he's obligated. If he wasn't obligated, why does he have karis? Amar Rabba says, you don't shech or sprinkle the blood for someone that's tamei, even though that evening he's going to be pure. That's very interesting. Rabbi Lezer has a very interesting shita. A guy touches a sheretz, he goes to the mikveh that evening, he starts. There's no problem. But right now he's tamei. So what does he do? He sends the Karban Pesach with someone else. Rabbi Lezer says we don't do that. We don't do that. Which means It's not because there was no chiyuv. It's not because there's no chiyuv. According to Rabbah, what's happening now is that we're taking back everything that we said about their gavra lechazi. The person wasn't eligible. We're not discussing if the person's eligible or not eligible. You don't bring the carbon pesach unless he's tahar right now. And after you sprinkle the paradum, he's not tahar right now. He'd have to wait for the night anyway. So it goes like this. Why don't you do that? Why don't you shech or sprinkle the blood for someone that's tummy right now, even though in the evening it'll be pure? Goes on. He says, if it would be an individual that's tummy, and he'd be pushed off to Pesach Sheni, if that's the case, then B'tzibur, the congregation is allowed to do it right now. In other words, if the entire congregation is tummy, they're allowed to do that. Everything that applies to the community applies to the individual. If it doesn't apply to the community, it doesn't apply to the individual. Arelos, when it comes to a circumcision, if everyone, for some reason, they just got out of the desert, they were all arelim, they all were uncircumcised. We have to tell them, go and get a bris. We don't say that you'll do it on Pesach Sheni. They have to get the bris. And we don't say we do it without a bris, rather. We don't say do it without a bris. They have to get the bris. So by the Yachid, because by the Tzibur, we tell them to get a bris, by the Yachid also, we tell them you have to get a bris. And if he doesn't, then there's kares. That's what the Brisa that Abaya quoted. That he could have gotten the bris and he didn't, there's kares. Tuma, when it comes to impurity, the kula tzibur tmeim ninu, that if everyone was tamei, if everyone is tamei, then we wouldn't tell him to do anything. We would just bring a petuma. So therefore, the individual doesn't have to do anything either. That's why, according to Rebbe Lezer, you don't sprinkle the water of paradum on him, and that's why you don't shecht for anyone that's tamei. Because if everyone would be tamei, then we would bring it. If everyone is not tamei, then you don't tell them that they have to do anything. They'll bring the carbon pesach sheni. Amle Ravuna Breder of Yeshua LeRava. It must have been Rava talking. I have Rabba on the bottom line. Rashi even says it's Rava. So Ravuna Breder of Yeshua says to Rava, what's going on? What was that statement that you just said? Anything that the Tzibur does, the Yachid has. Tzibur doesn't have a Pesach Sheni. The statement doesn't fit. Yeah, they don't have a Pesach Sheni because they never have a Pesach Sheni because they do it on the Pesach Rishon. If they're tummy, they do it on the first Pesach. So, I guess there's cases where not. It could be if they're all Zavim, but they're not allowed to. And then he doesn't answer that. Okay.
The two times that all the Jewish people were Parlaim were just before Yetzias Mitzrayim and just before Haknisas they entered into Eretz Yisrael, right?
Right.
And was it exactly 40 years later? Was it also just before Pesach?
Right.
When they entered into Israel?
Right.
So this was really Nogeya. This was a real issue then. Okay.
I forget where it was in Yeshua. They had all of the everyone got circumcised. Right. Okay, Meisvei. Where's the question? Maybe when it comes to the carbon pesach, the anish kares, someone doesn't bring the punishment of kares, that is cut off, excision. That applies to someone that doesn't bring a carbon pesach. Maybe that punishment is only on someone that was tahar, he was able to bring the Karban Pesach. He was tar, he was pure, and he wasn't distant from Yerushalayim. That's when he has the punishment. Oro v'tamei sheretz v'shar kol tmei minayin. Let's say someone didn't have a circumcision. He's tamei sheretz or any other tumah, and he didn't decide to make himself tar. How do we know that there's kares on him as well? Talmud Leimar v'ha'ish. Pasuk says v'ha'ish. We bring a pasuk to tell us that there's kares on these people as well. Now, was there really an obligation? Now, midaka mahader tamei sheretz. The fact that we had to bring a pasuk to tell me that someone that's tamei sheretz, there is kares there. Kosavar ein sheichten v'zarken al tamei sheretz. It must be that he wouldn't have been allowed to send his carbon. If you do shecht for someone that's tamei, why does it have to bring a special pasuk for it? Hainu tar. He's tar anyway. Because that evening he would be tar. Alma apagav b'leichazi chiyuv aleh. We see that even someone that's tamei still has an obligation. So we're talking over here now like this. This is like combining all of our complications together. We started off saying that if the person isn't obligated because he has an exemption, there's no obligation. You don't do anything to make him obligated. Then we said that's clearly not so because he gets punished if he didn't have his bris. So that's clearly not so. Then we say that rather the explanation is that if someone is tamei, he can't send his carbon and let it be and sprinkle it, shecht and sprinkle for him that's tamei. He can't send it. He's not going to eat it. Well, he doesn't eat it till that evening anyway. But he can't send the carbon and then try to become tar and eat it that evening. He can't do that either because you can't shecht it for someone that's tamei. Now we're saying that what does that help? You can't shecht for someone that's tamei. So therefore, we don't sprinkle the blood for him because we don't sprinkle the water of the paraduma for him to make him tar, because it's not going to help us with the shechita. Now we're saying that 1 second. We have over here a brisa that says that someone that's tamei sheretz, you don't sprinkle for him. Okay. You don't sprinkle the blood for him. You don't shecht the Karban Pesach for him. You don't sprinkle the blood. How do we know that? Because it's divided into two categories: someone that's tar and someone that's tamei. And it says someone that's tamei. We have a pasuk that says va'ish. Now, what does va'ish teach me? that there's a chi of kares. 1 second. If there's a chi of kares, then that meant that he did have an obligation to become tar, to be able to eat it that evening. And then what comes out is that the way we were putting this before was saying, no, if it's just tumah, so let him bring the Pesach Sheni. But here we're saying, let him bring the Pesach Sheni because if it would have been that the way we quoted it before was that anything that was involved, that the community would be allowed to do right now, we don't have him rectify it at all. We just have him bring the Pesach Sheni. But over here we're seeing that he should have rectified it. Elam Rava Kasavar Abelezer Sheikhtim V'Zoyken Al Tamei Sheretz Badam Tamei Meis B'Shvi Shalai. Rather, Rava says, Rabbi Lezer actually holds that you do shecht for someone that's tamei. And then And so if that's the case, then you have to sprinkle the blood also. This is going to contradict what we said before, that he says that you don't. If that's the case, if you shecht for someone that's tamei, then hazal lamai. Then why do you need to sprinkle the water on him to purify him? Let him send the carbon, and okay, he wasn't able to eat it, but he sent his carbon. Says it must be la'achila. That so he'll be able to eat it that evening. Achilas Pesachim la'makva. But eating the carbon pesach isn't ma'akiv bringing the carbon pesach. So therefore, that would be the new pshat. Rebbe Lezer holds that why don't we sprinkle the blood? Why don't we sprinkle the water of the paraduma on someone that's tamei? Because he can send his carbon and he doesn't need to be tar. He can't eat it. Okay, that's not ma'akiv the carbon. Amalei Ravada Barava L'Rava Imkein Nimtze Pesach Nishchad Shlei La'ichlad. But that means that you're shechting carbon Pesach for people that can't eat it, and that we said was clearly not acceptable. Amalei Shlei La'ichlad L'Chel Zaken D'Lei Chazi. Abal Hai Mechze Chazi Tzkunim Hegolei Mesaken. Shlei La'ichlad means someone that's totally not able to eat it. Here, this person is able to eat it. He just has like something that's blocking his mouth because he's tummy. What does this mean? Does this mean that, so who needs to do the Pesach Sheni? According to Rebbe Lezer, you can shecht for someone that's tamei and achilas pesachim le'makva. So let him send it with someone else, and he doesn't need. Any comments over there in the notes or something? Plus, maybe this is only when he's going to be able to eat it that evening. No, but we're saying that we're not sprinkling at all. Okay, I don't know. Let's finish. We'll finish to the Mishnah. Klal Amru Amar Rabbi Kiva. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Kiva gave a rule, which the rule was that anything that could have been done before Shabbos has to be done before Shabbos. And anything that couldn't have been done before Shabbos is allowed to be done on Shabbos. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav, halacha Rabbi Kiva. Halacha like Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Rav. Tanan nam gabi mila ki agav nekal Rabbi Kiva kol malacha shef shel aseis me'er Shabbos im deichus for Shabbos. Mila shef shel aseis me'er Shabbos deichus for Shabbos. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav, halacha Rabbi Kiva. By a bris as well, it says the same thing. The mila itself, the circumcision, needs to be done on Shabbos. That pushes off Shabbos. All the other preparations, preparing the knife and all of that, that could have been done before Shabbos. That has to be done before Shabbos. Comes Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav, halacha Rabbi Kiva. We need both of these statements, both by the Karban Pesach and by the Mila. Yashmin Gabi Pesach, if it would say by the Pesach, Hasam mitzvah, Hasam hu de machshiri mitzvah, Laidachu Shabbos, Mishum de Lai Nichusol Shalish Asir. I would say that because there's no 13 covenants that are said about the Karban Pesach, maybe it's more lenient. Aval Mila, I'm more strict about Shabbos. Aval Mila de Nichusol Shalish Asir Brisas, but the bris, that I can't give up, because it says 13 times that there's a covenant. By the bris milah, there's no karis on that day. Yes, there's karis if a person never gets a bris, but that day he'll do it. He can still do it tomorrow. The karis doesn't come that day. But by a Pesach, you have one shot. It's only one day that you can do it. So we'd say maybe it pushes off Shabbos, even the things that could have been done before him. So he needs to say both of them. Okay.